In the previous video, we looked at TDD or test-driven development. Today, we're going to learn 5 key things about yet another acronym, BDD or behavior-driven development. If you look at the product or software and zoom out to observe it from the end-to-end or UI perspective, then you could create a set of scenarios that describes the behavior of the system from the user perspective. You could call a meeting, invite people with different roles, business analysts, developers, and testers, and sit together and discuss those scenarios. This meeting is usually called 3 Amigos according to the amount of roles involved. An example of a scenario this group might produce could be a definition like that. Given I have a Google account and I'm authenticated and I'm watching this video and I haven't subscribed before, when I click the subscribe button, then Ivan gets happier. This gives us a first key thing to remember about BDD. Your tests need to describe a behavior. You can see from this test where we have a clear action, a verb. So when I do something, then I can observe certain behavior. We were talking about zoomed out or bird's eye view and discussed the behavior from user perspective. That's probably a most common way people practice BDD. But let's zoom in and look at the inner guts of the system, its code. You might look at the classes, the methods, the functions. Small history lesson. In 2006, Daniel Terhorst North, the person who coined the BDD idea, published an article stating that if you change the word test with the word behavior, it changes your perception and ultimately it helps with the way you approach testing of your code. Behavior gives your test a clear, narrow scope. You're testing this specific behavior and this is your one test. Another behavior will become another test and so on. How can this look in practice? Here's an example of such test. I have a little, let's say, function or implementation, and I have a little test. If I run this test, by the way, I use the Jest framework to do it. You could learn about it by clicking on this link. If I run this test, you will see the output tells you a little story about this method's behavior. Given user is not subscribed, when can subscribe is called, then it returns true. This is BDD-like test. The missing thing here is that we skipped the driven development part of BDD, so we have only B right now. We're going to get back to it in a minute. Meanwhile, key thing to remember number 2, BDD is not only for UI or end-to-end tests. Let's look at the words given, when, and then. I used them multiple times already in this video. This called a Gherkin syntax. It's quite a big thing in the BDD practitioner community. Also, you could notice that this structure follows the arrange, act, and assert style. So, given when something is happening, it's a arrange, then act is this one, and then assert. So this is arrange, this is act, this is assert. Personally, I don't always follow the Gherkin style of describing a behavior. You could name your test this way: can subscribe function when called with a user that is not subscribed should return true. And it still describes the behavior and tells a good story. Or you might do it slightly differently. Can subscribe function should return true when called with a user that is not subscribed. Key thing to remember number 3, BDD is not a Gherkin syntax. This syntax is going to be your friend if you start practicing BDD. If you like this syntax, great. If not, you could bend the rules slightly and use your own style as far as you being clear and consistent in naming. Just make sure you onboard people you work with to follow the same guidelines. Now let's get back to the part of BDD that we parked before, that BDD is driving development. If I'm writing code and I'm practicing TDD by writing my test first and then giving my test a clear name that is describing behavior, then I also practice BDD. It feeds into a little bit of test first implementation, test implementation loop we discussed last time. By the way, if you haven't seen my video about TDD yet, check it out. So key thing to remember here is BDD is not TDD. But if you think about behavior first, you could be practicing BDD while doing TDD. Often when we hear about BDD, we associate it with a framework that implements it, like Cucumber or Specflow, or one of many others, really. This thinking is not quite correct. BDD is an idea that tells us that describing behavior will drive the development. Simple as that. Frameworks like Cucumber is one of many practical implementations of this idea for a given programming language and ecosystem, in this case JavaScript. Key thing to remember number 5, BDD is not Cucumber. We learned 5 key things about BDD. Describe a behavior. BDD is not only for UI or end-to-end tests, but almost always used for creating them. BDD is not a Gherkin syntax, but it's actually pretty useful. BDD is not TDD, but they might coexist and complement each other. BDD is not Cucumber, even though some people may put an equal sign between them. Overall, BDD is a great concept. It brings a natural common English sentences structure to describe a behavior of a system in a given situation. Of course, in real life, BDD is very often misused. BDD is trying to bring technical and non-technical people together by using this common ubiquitous language both parties understand. In reality, if you do 3 Amigos and produce a set of specifications in a plain text, you can write your tests in a test framework of your choice, proving that your system works as expected for the scenarios. And most likely, you will never ever see the business people reading your code or looking at the test results after the pipeline have been run. If not, why bother with the extra complexity of the framework like Cucumber or Specflow? It's more code, it's more maintenance. Just give your tests clear names, use given when then syntax to describe the behavior of your software in a story-like manner, and you'll be alright. See you next time.